We're now on Daf Lamed Daled Omud Beis. Now, the Gemara says, focusing on the relationship or the comparison between Truma and Kodesh, that with regard to Truma, and now we're on the top of Lamed Daled Omud Beis, Tuma hi Eitzel Hegdish, right? A Shlishi in Truma is not Tuma. As we said over and over again on Amid Aleph, it's only a psul. Masha Enkein, in contrast, Hegdesh has a revi, which means that a shlishi could now convey tuma to a revi. So in general, what we see is that the standards of tuma are that much more strict and stringent with regard to kodesh as compared to truma. Okay, so what exactly is Rabbi Yeshua's point over here? And I know we very much want to move ahead to finish the Omid, but I think we should spend a minute or two trying to decipher what this argument of Rabbi Yeshua is. So again, I'm just thinking it out loud. If someone accepts upon himself Chullin Altaras Hatruma, then it's a less stringent acceptance or standard than Chullin Altaras HaKodesh. Okay, fine. That's number one. That we understand. So if that be the case, if you're going to consider something a shlishi with regard to truma, then with a kolshkein, how much more so it should be considered a shlishi with regard to kodesh. So if I understand correctly, Rabbi Yeshua is telling us that if you eat a shlishi of chulin, that was altaras truma, then when you accept yourself on yourself altaras truma, and you're going to, so to speak, protect the chulin to make sure that it doesn't become tummy, that's only on a lower level of taras truma. And that's not going to be sufficient for Kodesh, since Kodesh requires a more stringent level of protection from Tumah. So therefore, Rabbi Yeshua insists that with regard to Kodesh, if you eat a shlishi of chulin, and you accept it upon yourself altaras truma, then although with regard to truma, we're going to say that your status is that of a shlishi, but with regard to kodesh, we're going to jack it up, and we're going to say that you're now a sheni. So again, it's a relativity theory that relative to the laws of truma, you're a shlishi, but relative to the laws of kodesh, you're a sheni. Why? Because we're going to think that he wasn't so careful about it, because he only accepted upon himself altaras truma. So with regard to kodesh, right, if he eats a shlishi of chulin, we're going to treat him as if it was a sheni. Let me just read this out loud. He says the standards of Tara maintained by someone who eats truma would not be sufficient. He's not giving the same level of shmira as somebody who eats kodesh. Right? Let's say, for example, I mean, again, just giving a mitzias, a technical, logistical thing. Let's say you have kohanim who are doing the avoda, and you have kohanim who are not doing the avoda. The kohanim who are not doing the avoda are eating truma. The kohanim who are doing the avoda are eating kodesh. So it's more logical that the kohanim who are constantly eating kodesh will accept upon themselves chulin al taras hakodesh, whereas the kohanim who are eating truma will only accept upon themselves that level of shmira, so they shouldn't confuse chulin with truma in terms of the laws of tumah. Therefore, food of a truma standard that became a shlishi, which means it's not tummy, it's only pasul. As far as the standard of kodesh is concerned, we're going to consider it a sheni. In other words, we're going to upgrade the level of tumah with regard to kodesh, because the standards of shmira with regard to kodesh are that much more strict. So therefore, one who eats the chulin of shlishi with regard to kodesh becomes a sheni. Now it's clear from that and we go back to our Mishnah, and the Mishnah is talking about a case of chulin. So Rabbi Eliezer was saying that the Mishnah is dealing with a case of chulin. He was assuming, Rabbi Eliezer, in his attack, so to speak, against Rabbi Yeshua, that if he accepted chulin al taras ha-truma, then that chulin could become a shlishi, which makes sense because, again, it would passel the truma, if it were truma, if he made a mistake and it was really truma. But with regard to chulin al taras hakodesh, it cannot become a shlishi. And this is the way that Rabbi Bar Chana understood, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, the shakal v'tari between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, and therefore he, Rabbi Bar Chana, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, is to be identified as the Chevraya of Ula, who said that our Mishnah cannot be reconciled with Rabbi Yeshua, because our Mishnah seems to imply that if he accepted upon himself chulin al taras hakodesh, then it could become a shlishi. And Rabbi Bar Chana, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, understood from the shakal v'tarya back and forth the way Rabbi Eliezer attacked Rabbi Yeshua. Maybe he didn't have Rabbi Yeshua's response, I don't know, that Rabbi Yeshua was dafka talking about creating a shlishi in a case of taras truma, which cannot be reconciled with our Mishnah, because our Mishnah is talking about basar, and there's no altaras truma with regard to basar. That institution doesn't exist. Ula, on the other hand, understood Rabbi Yeshua based on the response that Rabbi Yeshua gave to Rabbi Eliezer that as far as Altaras HaKodesh is concerned, the Chullin can become a Sheni L'Tumah. So therefore, it's quite clear that Rabbi Yeshua can now, according to Ula, be reconciled with our Mishnah, and our Mishnah is going to say that it's prohibited to use Yodayim Misoavos, which are Sheni L'Tumah, to come in contact with this meat, because we're talking not Altaras Truma, which doesn't apply to meat, but rather Altaras Kodesh. And Rabbi Yeshua is going, according to his last counter-argument against Rabbi Eliezer, as Ula had it, is going to assume that Altaras HaKodesh could make Chullin into a Sheni L'Tumah. All right, let's go on. Omer Rabbi Zera, Omer Rav Aser, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yaneh. Ha'ochel shlish. It seems like at this point in the sugya we finished with this whole long discussion for a blot and a half as to who's the author of our Mishnah. Ha'ochel shlishi shel chulin shenasu altaras hakodesh nase gufo sheni lekodesh. So this would reflect Ula's opinion. Let me just see if he. I don't know if he mentions that or not. And nase gufo sheni lekodesh. So it means, again, I'm going to add the word Ula, that even Chullin, that he accepted upon himself Altaras HaKodesh, can become Tomei. And again, even a Shlishi in Kodesh is genuine Tumah. And this follows the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua, according to that explanation, that one who eats a Shlishi of Chullin, Altaras HaKodesh, becomes a Sheni L'Tumah. Esvei Rabbi Zera Ravasi, after Rabbi Zera transmitted this halach in the name of Ravasi, he asked the kasha to Ravasi, and he's basing his kasha on a Mishnah in Taros, which we already quoted earlier. Shlishi, if somebody eats a Shlishi, Sheni L'Kodesh, he becomes a Sheni L'Kodesh. So far, so good. But ve'ein Sheni L'Truma, and that's a case of Chullin shenas altaras Truma. Now, if he says and qualifies, this is all Rabbi Yeshua, Altaras Truma, it means Altaras Truma in Altaras HaKodesh Lo. And we just said that with regard to a Shlishi of Chullin, that if it's a level of Altaras HaKodesh, then the Ochel becomes Tomei, as if he were a Sheni L'Tumah. But yet here, in this Mishnah, in Masechet Taras, it seems to indicate that Rabbi Yeshua is only talking about Altaras Truma. Amalei Lomi Boy Komar. Again, the old Lomi Boy. If you're telling me that the Ochel in a case of Altaras Truma becomes Tomei, how much more so in a case where the Ochel was Makabel Altaras Kodesh. So Gemara says, "V'ha'af ani lo amarti el b'truma ka'omar." Right, we had before the Shakla V'Tarya back and forth between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, and Rabbi Yeshua responded that I only spoke about, somebody who eats a shlishi becomes a sheni with regard to Chullin Altaras Truma. Now, you just finished saying, Ravasi, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that even with someone who eats a shlishi of Chullin Altaras HaKodesh, he becomes a sheni L'Tumah. And the Gemara answers, "Hamoroi ninu al liba de Rabbi Yochanan." So there are two transmissions of what Rabbi Yochanan actually said in terms of interpreting Rabbi Yeshua. According to Rabbi Yochanan, in the name quoted by Rabbi Bar Chana, is Rabbi Yeshua was talking only about Taras Truma. Rav Asi, on the other hand, had a different tradition of Rabbi Yochanan as saying that Rabbi Yeshua would apply certainly Lomi Boy in a case of Altaras HaKodesh, and if a person eats a shlishi of Chullin, he becomes a sheni with regard to Kodesh. Even in a case where he accepted upon himself with regard to the Chullin, Altaras Kodesh. Omar Ula. Ha'ochel shlishi shel Chullin, that's what we've been discussing until now. Shenasu Altaras HaTruma, nifsal gufo milechol truma. In other words, he cannot transmit tuma because he only ate a shlishi, and there's no revi in truma. But he himself is not allowed to eat truma. Why? Because he ate chulin that was a shlishi. Now, I thought this was a pretty big chiddush, that when we get to a shlishi l'truma, which is only a psul, the ochel is prohibited from eating truma. But the Gemara has the opposite approach. The Gemara says, "My kamash malon tanina." We already know this from the Mishnah, because as we had above, the Mishnah says shlishi. Right, he ate chulin that was a shlishi. Sheni lekodesh, v'ein sheni letruma. Now, what does it mean, ein sheni letruma? It means that the person who ate it cannot transmit tuma. That makes sense. Right? He's not a sheni. B'chulin shenasu al taras truma. Now let's be medayik. It says ein sheni letruma means he cannot be a sheni who's capable of transmitting tuma. But as far as he himself eating the truma, sheni udlo havi or shlishi havi. So with regard to truma, he's considered a shlishi. A shlishi is not allowed to eat truma. So we see from Rabbi Yeshua exactly what Ula is telling me. What is Ula discovering here? If we only had Rabbi Yeshua's statement, I mean, I would have thought, lo sheni havi velo shlishi havi. When he said he's not a sheni, he meant to say he's not a shlishi as well. So with regard to truma, he's not a sheni or a shlishi, and therefore he's allowed to eat truma. Let me just see what he adds here. According to Rabbi Yeshua's Shita, the ochel goes down to a lesser degree of tuma, except relative to kodesh. The iditi omer sheni b'kodesh, omer nami ein sheni b'truma. So don't derive from Rabbi Yeshua that the person who eats this truma, this chulin, is considered a shlishi, and he's not allowed to eat truma. Kamash malan, Ula wants to tell us that the one who eats it, and he eats this chulin, and he was makabel on himself, altares truma, he's considered a shlishi, and therefore he's not allowed to eat truma. Eisvei Rav Hamnuna le'ula. And now we have a Mishnah in Masechet Taros. Harishon shebechulin tamei umetame. So you have chulin that is a rishon. Obviously, it's tamei, and not only that, it could create a sheni l'tuma if it comes in contact with other food. Now, what's the status of the second food? It's a sheni. And a sheni posel v'eina metame. As we said over and over again with regard to truma, There's no such thing as a shlishi that's tameh. A shlishi is only pasul. And now he says, "Vashlishi nechol b'nizid hadema." So nizid hadema is some sort of cooked food in which he put, let's say, spices or whatever that was truma. So it's chulin mixed with truma. And now, because it's truma mixed in, then the laws of tum v'tara of truma are now going to apply to this stew, to this nizid hadema. Wait a second. Amrit, according to what you said, that if a person eats a shlishi le chulin, that we apply the standards of truma, which means that he cannot be mitame truma, but he's not allowed to eat truma because his goof became tame as a shlishi. Nifsal gufa milechal truma. Is safina le midi the puzzle le gufe? How could we possibly say that a shlishi nechal, that you're allowed to eat it, and it's got truma mixed into it? And the Gemara answers that you don't know how much truma was mixed into it. Amalei hanoch l'nizid adema the leka kizayis b'chtei achilas pras. So again, even though if you eat this mixture, it becomes what? It becomes tameh. But nevertheless, the achila will not apply. Why? Because the Torah prohibits you from eating it. If you're going to eat it, kizayis b'chtei achilas pras. But here, in this case of dema, of nizid dema, there's no kizayis b'chtei achilas pras. So the chulin is the rove of this nizid, of this mixture, and you don't have to keep it and judge it by the standards of truma, right? Because the rove is not truma, and therefore you're allowed to eat it. Why? Because it doesn't have kizayis b'chtei achilas pras. In other words, you added spices, but the be'en is not so thick within the stew, within the chulin, that it's kizayis within achilas pras. So meaning if you ate from this stew in the time that it takes to eat a pras, let's say it takes 9 minutes to eat a pras, you would not be eating a kizayis of truma, because the truma is dispersed throughout the mixture in small amounts. But let's say you have chulin al taras hatruma, which we said has a din of a shlishi, but only as far as itself to passel it. So therefore, if he eats that shlishi, he becomes a shlishi. And he's not allowed to contaminate himself. So we got up to Omar Rab Yonasan, Omar Rebbe, here on Daf Lamed Hey, in Mirz Hashem. We'll pick that up tomorrow. Thank you so much. We're really entering into a world of Tumah V'Tar.